Well, as you all know by now, Donald Trump decided to bomb the capital of Syria, Damascus, and this is a dramatic escalation not only between the US and Syria, but the US and Russia as well. And seeing as how an unhinged maniac just put us on the doorstep of World War III, you'd think that most people would be mad, especially the so-called resistance, but in fact, a lot of them didn't seem too mad about it. So when you go to Chuck Schumer, the leader of the so-called resistance, he actually tweeted out support for Donald Trump's bombings. I'm not kidding. Saying a pinpointed limited action to punish and hopefully deter Assad from doing this again is appropriate, but the administration has to be careful about not getting us into a greater and more involved war in Syria. Now, clearly, Chuck Schumer didn't proofread his tweet, because by bombing Syria, you are getting us more involved with war in Syria. It's inherently contradictory, genius. So, I don't even know what Chuck Schumer is trying to say. All he thought was bombs, that's a good thing. Now, Nancy Pelosi, another Democratic Party leader, did seem to support it overall, although there is a caveat. She was a little bit upset that Donald Trump didn't ask Congress for their permission first, even though it seemed like she would have given him permission to do that. But she also stated, of course, the importance of holding Putin accountable, as he literally bombed one of Putin's top allies. We have to go back a little bit and think about how absurd this is. As he's bombing Syria, an ally of Russia, she's saying he needs to hold Putin accountable. Are you nuts, Nancy? Do you want World War III? Are you willing to pick up a gun and fight? I don't think you are. So maybe you should be careful about what you are pressuring an unhinged maniac, according to your words, to do. Now, Democrat Bill Nelson just straight up supports the bombing, with no caveats whatsoever, no stipulations. He supports it. So there were a lot of fans of Donald Trump's decision to bomb Syria, even if it was illegal under international law and unconstitutional. But you're not really going to find a bigger fan and cheerleader for Donald Trump than you will among the missile manufacturer industry. Companies like Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin, who saw their stock value rise by $5 billion as a result of Donald Trump bombing Damascus. But not everyone was happy with Donald Trump's bombings. In fact, warmonger Lindsey Graham was a bit pissed off that Donald Trump wasn't more harsh. So it seemed as though bombing Assad before we had any evidence whatsoever that he used chemical weapons, or even still has chemical weapons, mind you, since there were reports that he gave them up before, that seems like a popular decision. People don't really seem to be pissed off at Donald Trump for doing this. Something that could escalate to World War III, not a big deal. So that's what politicians, for the most part, think about Donald Trump's bombing of Syria. Democrats, they weren't really taking a stand against war itself, so much as they were resisting Donald Trump by saying, well, you can't really do this unless you come to Congress first. So, they're not really taking a principled stand against war itself. They're just saying, well, Donald Trump, just ask us. But really, if Donald Trump did come to Congress, how many of these spineless Democrats would vote for him to bomb Syria? A lot of them, if not all of them, with the exception of a couple of holdouts. So these politicians, they're all bloodthirsty, they're all neoconservative warmongers, but what really matters is if the American people are informed and if our mainstream media is holding government accountable as they try to get us into another war. Are they asking the right questions here? Are they saying, well, why bomb him before we conduct an investigation? Why bomb him before we have evidence? Didn't Assad give up his chemical weapons? Why does it suit Assad to gas his own people? What chemical agent did he even use? Well, these are the questions that a competent media would ask, but unfortunately for us, media was some of the biggest cheerleaders for Donald Trump. Of course, not to be surpassed by defense contractors, but they cheerleaded on his efforts to bomb Syria. In fact, MSNBC's Ali Velshi decided to respond to a tweet made by TYT's Cenk Uygur, where he called out mainstream media pundits, saying, "It's incredible how readily the cable news channels have politicians on pushing for war in Syria with almost no questions asked about how disastrous it might be or the so-called evidence. They pretended to learn lessons from Iraq, but have actually learned nothing." Now, Ali Velshi responded to Cenk saying, "Have you missed the 7 years of the Assad regime killing 500,000 of its own people? How about how disastrous it's been for the world to not have taken a role in Syria? The lesson here is not from Iraq, it's from the Holocaust, from Rwanda, from Bosnia." Actually, no, the lesson here is to be taken from Iraq, because in the lead up to the Iraq War, our leaders told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and the media went along with that narrative. They didn't question it at all. And now, you're telling us here that we're supposed to believe that Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, when the last time we checked, he doesn't even have chemical weapons, and furthermore, it doesn't suit him personally, knowing that he would provoke an attack by the US. So, if you are going to use your logic here, we're supposed to already accept that we've been presented with the evidence, and then we take action. But even if we got evidence that Assad gassed his own people, that was, you couldn't question it. We knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Assad was gassing his own people. Well, Saudi Arabia is carrying out a genocide in Yemen. Should we invade them? Myanmar is waging a literal genocide against the Rohingya. We gonna attack them too, Ali? There are atrocities being committed around the world that you're ignoring. You have a TV show in the mainstream media. You can cover this. But you only care about Syria, which also happens to be a really important country because our intervention in Syria also happens to suit our geopolitical interests. Isn't it interesting how that works out? What about Israel? Does Ali Velshi care about Israel, who just killed 17 peaceful Palestinian protesters? Are we going to drop a couple of bombs on them? You see, the job of the media, Ali, is to ask these types of questions, to ask the government to provide us with evidence that Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. Mainstream corporate media is as obedient to the state as it was in Ben Ali's Tunisia before the revolution, as it is in Egypt. They are nothing more than propaganda for the Pentagon. So congratulations, Ali, you are a useful idiot. But he's not alone, because according to FAIR, major newspapers urge Trump to kill Syrians, risk World War III, and they explain how the New York Times editorial board subtly suggested that Trump should bomb Syria by saying he should follow through on his tough talk. Now, additionally, The Guardian's Simon Tisdall demanded military action, and, of course, the editorial board of The Washington Post said U.S. leadership would be further diminished in the world if Trump didn't bomb them. And those assessments don't even include cable news, because CNN may have actually been on par with Fox News, who typically is the worst when it comes to warmongering, because they just allowed the White House to set the agenda it wanted to set. They didn't even question it. They aired comments from Nikki Haley. They aired a 34-minute press briefing from the Pentagon, and that doesn't even include all of the warmongers that they brought on to tell us that bombing Syria was a good idea. So, the situation in this country is so bad with how awful the media is, with how unwilling they are to question the narrative being handed down to us by the Pentagon. The U.S. government, it really is empowered to get involved with any country they want to, because the media will just go along with it. And if you question it, you're the weirdo. If you ask questions that are legitimate, you're the one who's being conspiratorial. And again, the Iraq War was 15 years ago when the government lied to us. Is it really that implausible that they could be lying to us again because they have a geopolitical interest and they want to invade Syria? But what's really weird about all of this is that even though Fox News certainly did its part in promoting this war, we saw the most amount of anti-war voices come out of the network, which is really weird. This is the PR wing of the Republican Party, and then you had people like Tucker Carlson, who really emerged as the leading anti-war voice with regard to Syria.
It's our moral duty, endless CNN panels have reminded us, to uphold international standards of behavior and punish war criminals like Assad. Okay. But are we sure Assad was responsible for the gas attacks? Many people claim he was. They started claiming that within hours of the attacks themselves, before many of the most basic facts were even known, and they're still claiming it. But where's the proof?
Also, credit where it's due, Laura Ingraham questioned the dominant narrative, asking thoughtful questions about our reasoning for bombing Syria.
There are atrocities committed every day all over the world, including in our strategic adversary, China. And yet we go in again with a military strike, a year after a previous military strike, And I guess it feels good because there are horrible things happening there. But what do we really accomplish here tonight in Syria? This was not why Donald Trump got elected, in my view.
And surprisingly, Tommy Lahren, who basically is wrong about everything else, came out against the bombing in Syria.
The last thing we should do is continue our involvement in another Mideast disaster.
And last but certainly not least, conspiracy theorist Alex Jones even came out against Trump's bombings in Syria.
I'm not in a fucking cult for Donald Trump. Fuck him. Fuck his family. Fuck all these people.
Now, I'm not trying to imply here that Fox News is suddenly an anti-war voice. They're not, because those three voices on Fox News, they were the exception. Everyone else was in favor of war, besides just three voices on Fox News, and again, a deranged conspiracy theorist. Now, of course, as usual, there were progressive journalists that spoke out against this. That includes Glenn Greenwald, the great Rania Kaliak. But the pro-war voices were so loud this time that it completely drowned out progressives. It seemed as though every single person was on board with this. And it really, just in my own social circles, it became socially acceptable to support this. You couldn't question the narrative at all, otherwise you're a conspiracy theorist. So this is the state of our country. Government can wage war in any country they want to because the media will go along with it. And again, media is often considered a fourth branch of government because it's supposed to be a check on government power and authority. They're supposed to stop and ask the really important questions, but they're not doing that. They're cheerleading Donald Trump on and gobbling up any information the Pentagon gives them. This is a really terrifying time to reside in the United States if you are against war, because the media has legitimized the Pentagon and military-industrial complex. Anything they tell us, we have to accept and not question it. And if you do question it, you're the weirdo. 15 years after Iraq. This is sad.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.